Liselle Sambury. I'm a traditionally published author, and welcome to my end of the year wrap up. This video is potentially going to be long, so I will have timestamps below if you want to jump around to the sections that are interesting to you, that you want to listen to. That's totally cool. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of things today. I'm going to talk a little bit about traditional publishing, sort of, things that were different from last year or the same, some of my wins and disappointments, things that I want to improve next year, etc., etc. I'm also going to discuss a little bit about my writing process this year as well, and I'm going to discuss also my YouTube channel because there were some changes in my channel that I didn't really talk at a length about, and so I wanted to chat a bit about those. And then I was also going to finish with a reading update because those book videos that I thought I was going to do this year didn't happen and will probably never happen. And so I thought I'd just do a little quick wrap up, just talking about how many books I read this year and goals for my reading, and share some of the favorite books that I read during the year as well. And so that's everything that's going to be in this video. I will have a video dedicated to talking about my writing projects, and that's going to come out next month. So that video will be solely focused on, I worked on this project and I finished this project, etc., etc. This is really more of a very general overview. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the traditional publishing section. So this section, I'm going to talk about all things that are to do with publishing from that end, and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm going to begin with talking about things that were the same or different from last year. So starting with something that was the same from last year, I feel like I continue to have a good rapport with my publisher. I think I get along very well with my publisher and my editor. And something that I really appreciate about my publisher is that I find them to be quite straightforward. So, we can ask them, I say we as in me and my agent can ask them about something, and we will pretty much get either a yes or no, or it depends sort of answer, but we do consistently get answers, which you would think would maybe not be something that you needed to point out as a positive, but I know a few people who get fully ghosted by their editors and publishers, so it does in fact make a big difference. And so I feel like I've continued to have a very good relationship with them. They don't always say yes to everything, but they also don't always say no to everything, and so I feel like that's been good. What's been different this year is that I'm now working with more publishers and more editors, because I have my IP project, the He-Man project, and then I've also been in anthologies. And so it's been a different sort of experience to work with different publishers and different editors, because I've previously just worked with one publisher and one editor. So that's definitely been something different, and interesting to see the different styles, and also to see the different kind of cogs of how different publishing houses work as well, even if it's just a little bit of a snapshot, because in an anthology I'm not super in-depth involved, but it has been interesting to see that dynamic. So that's something that's been different. Something that's been the same, that I was kind of surprised was the same, is that I have maintained a steady stream of virtual events. I feel like pretty much every month I'll have some sort of virtual event that I'm doing, and I did have a couple in-person things that I did, but I felt like for the most part, I kind of had something going on each month, which I hadn't expected. I kind of expected to peter out. Though I will say what's been different is I've had opportunities to do moderation for a couple things. I've also changed what I've accepted in terms of events. So I kind of had a discussion with my publicist to be I really don't want to do things where I'm gonna create a presentation or a workshop or something, and I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna present to people, just because I did that in the past and I just found it to be really, really stressful for me. I found that I just didn't like it, didn't enjoy it. And so I was I would rather do things in a Q&A format. And so there were a few virtual requests that came in for me to do something that were kind of would have been a presentation, and we were able to work with them to make it more of a question and answer sort of thing, which is much easier on me because I'm not having to create something, and I'm also not having to just talk continuously about myself for however long. And so I really appreciated having that flexibility in that. And even like with a school visit, I had done a school visit where I did have to talk endlessly about myself, but I didn't have to do a whole presentation thing, which was something that I knew would take up a lot of my time. And speaking of time, that's one of the differences of this year. I have a lot more projects. I had a lot more projects this year, and so I had a lot less bandwidth, and so I did have to say no to some things just because the amount of projects I had going on, I couldn't always say yes to a bunch of things. For me, that ended up being a lot of blurbing, which is too bad, but because, you know, I want to like support other authors if they're asking for blurbs and things like that. Like I want to be able to like jump in there and do that, but it ended up being something that a lot of times I didn't have time for, which hopefully, you know, my workload will even out a little bit more next year, and that'll be a little bit more feasible. I'm going to talk about that later though, but that was one of the differences of this year for sure, was my workload. And something that was the same that I wish wasn't the same is I continue to have my anxiety around my book failing. I feel like because in my mind, the publishing machine turns on at like 3 months, which it might actually be a little bit more like 2 months. But anyway, in my head, turns on at like 3 months, which isn't true. Publishers do stuff way in advance, but I really mean things that like I can see and start having focus of, you know, like pickup and media and blogs and things like that, or like trade reviews or junior library guild picks and like indie next picks and etc. picks and stuff happening around your book. Like I feel like I can feel the most publicity around that time. And so then I just start to panic because I'm like, am I getting enough? Is enough stuff happening? Is the book failing? And what's gonna go on with that? And so that continues. But you know, I'm working on my things around my anxiety. So I'm working on that. So I'm hoping that will improve in the future. And then maybe this can be something that'll be different, is that I won't panic as much every single time I have a book come out. But we will see. So hopefully that will improve. And then the kind of final differences are both positive differences. So my publisher sent me 2 things this year. So they brought me to Toronto to do that Indigo TikTok book club event. And then they also brought me to NCT/Allen in California to do that educator event, which was really great, because it was also always very exciting and like the total dream for my publisher to like invest in me enough to want to send me places. And so I really appreciated that. And that was a really fun difference. And what has also been a really great difference is that Delicious Monsters is a bigger title in my publisher than my other books have been. And so I've gotten increased publicity and marketing and pickup and attention for that within the publisher, which has also been really great. So that's another positive. So it's been exciting to have one of my books be a higher priority title and like see some of the things that come along with that. So that's also been great. So those are kind of the same and different things in traditional publishing. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about the wins and the difficulties. So I'm going to start with the wins, which maybe I should have done it the other way around, but oh well, it's too late. We're going to be doing it like this. One of the wins, I already kind of talked about this in the same and the difference, is Delicious Monsters being treated as a higher priority title, or I don't know how you would say it. I wouldn't actually say it. So this is the thing that I've discovered. It's hard to necessarily gauge or say lead title. So there are names that people assign to the way books are kind of prioritized by the publisher. And so there's kind of mid-list titles, which is what I would have considered my books, which is like you get kind of an even amount of things. You might have like some budget for some things, but not like a huge amount of budget. And so that's kind of what I would say would be mid-list. And then there's lead titles. And when you're a lead title, you get a lot more things. But something I'd learned last year, I believe, is that publishers don't necessarily tell you that you are a lead title. So some publishers will, and some publishers don't really say that. So I've never been told that my book is a lead title, but I have been told that, you know, they're putting a lot of energy and focus into the title. And they do think it has a lot of potential. So that's why I'm using words like higher priority because I haven't actually been delineated as a lead title per se. So that's why I'm using that term in case you were wondering. So having Delicious Monsters treated as a higher priority title has been really great and a really big win for me, because it's great. It's always good to have bigger publisher push. I'm one of those people, I really do believe that like the success of your book comes largely from your publisher's support and your publisher's push and your publisher's backing. I think there are certainly ways that authors can kind of create a lot of buzz on their own. But I think at the end of the day, what your publisher can do for you is going to be an enormous part of that within traditional publishing. So of course, it's really great to get a lot of publisher pickup and support. So that's been a really big win. Something else that has been a win is to see people continue to give a lot of love and support to Blood Like Magic and Blood Like Fate and the whole series. That's been really great. Like, it's kind of wild to see people continuing to discover Blood Like Magic so far away from the release date, and to see it continue to like pop up and people to talk about, oh my gosh, you know, I read it and I loved it and I'm enjoying it so much and I can't wait to read the next book. Like, that's been something I've really appreciated a lot. I think especially this year because sequels are hard. It's really hard to have a sequel because it's just, it doesn't, at least in my experience, it doesn't perform as well as the first book. And I feel like also people naturally never like the sequel as much as the first book. And so it feels like it begins as an uphill battle. And it was, you know, I'll talk about this more in difficulties, I guess. I guess I'm overlapping, but you know, it can be a struggle with sequels. And so I've really appreciated continuing to see a lot of support for Blood Like Magic and for my first book because, you know, it's my first book. I love it a lot. I love all my books, but it's my first book. And so I really appreciated seeing people continue to discover it, and continue to read the book. So that's been really exciting. And I think having the paperback has also really helped because paperbacks are more affordable. And so that's been great as well. So that was a big win. And another big win for me was getting to see a bunch of authors in person that I had only ever interacted with online. I got to do that this year because I got to do more in-person things. And that was really great. Like, I really appreciated that. That was so fun for me. And it was just like, it was a really exciting time. I think I'm a kind of a chronically online person. I think especially now that I live up north and I don't live in the city and I kind of don't really have access to all the friends and family that I did when I was down there. I kind of spent a lot of time in my house. And so those kind of online friendships and relationships are really important to me because those kind of make up the bulk of my social life, to be honest. And so it was really nice to get to see those people in person and interact in that way. And so that was a really big win for me. Yeah, I really appreciated that. And it made me feel like I felt very nostalgic for 2019 when I had been doing so much more of that. And, you know, I was living in Toronto and I was seeing all these writers all the time and like going to all these different like book events and writer events. And I felt like so immersed in the community in that way. In a different way than online, because I still really value the things I've been able to do online. And so it was just kind of nice to be able to get to have some of that back. And now for the difficulties. So I already started talking about this, but Blood Like Fate and having a sequel was really hard. It was really difficult. I feel like I definitely could palpably feel that it got less general pickup, which wasn't to say it was nowhere, because in traditional publishing, it really is a privilege to see your book anywhere. And my publisher has put the book in a bunch of things, is still putting the book in a bunch of things. It's part of their, 25 reads of Christmas, so you can read it for free for one day. But that's going to be after this time has passed, so I won't advertise that. But like my publisher is still doing things. It just I felt like the general wider media pickup for it was less. I just felt like it got less attention in that way. But it's understandable because it's a sequel. And so people have to have read the first book to read this. And if people haven't gotten to reading the first book, they're not going to pay that much attention to the sequel. And also there might be people that didn't like Blood Like Magic and therefore didn't want to read the sequel. And so you can lose people that way as well. And so it felt so different because Blood Like Magic had gotten such a really, really good reception, so much more than I ever thought it would. And then it just felt kind of a little bit like womp, womp, womp. But what was really good about Blood Like Fate is I could tell that people who loved Blood Like Magic were really excited about Blood Like Fate and were really looking forward to it and anticipating it. And I appreciated that a ton. And it makes sense because those are the people that are the fans of the series. And so, I had to spend many a time being like, just focus on the people that are excited for it. But I think it's hard when you have a book do well, and I wanted Blood Like Fate to do just as well as Blood Like Magic, and it didn't. And that was hard for me because I want, you always want to feel like you're going up and increasing and getting better. And it felt like I had gone down, because it didn't do as well as Blood Like Magic. But I think it's just kind of the way of sequels, and it's something to kind of get used to or come to expect or understand about the nature of writing a series. So that was a difficulty for me for sure to work through. Another difficulty was my continued anxiety around book success. And I think I thought that when I had a higher priority title, I would feel better because I'd feel things are gonna go great. But in fact, it just kind of translated into a different sort of thing, which is I feel like with my previous books, I was like, oh, I really want my books to do well. And I'm panicked about whether they're going to do well. And now I feel like with Delicious Monsters in this book, because it's been, kind of a higher priority title, I just feel like, I'm now panicked about, will it do well enough? Because, there's a feeling of expectation that it's going to do better than my titles before. Or at least that's the feeling that I have, is that it's going to do better. And so now I have this panic of it's not enough to just do well, because I feel like I think if Delicious Monsters did just as well as Blood Like Magic, I might actually think that was a failure because it was supposed to do better. And so now I've unlocked the new anxiety of, will my book do well enough? And so that's another difficulty. And I say all this from what I understand to be a very privileged position, as an author. To have my publisher investing more in my title is a huge privilege and a huge honor. And I'm very, very thankful to my publisher, and I'm very excited to have all those things. But, the whole purpose of sharing these things and talking about this on my channel is to share those sorts of things in what I feel, honesty and transparency. And for me, that's been part of the process. Is now I'm in this headspace of, I don't know that it's enough to just do well. And so that's kind of a new panic thing, but we will see how that goes. How I've always kind of worked through these things is, you can't control it. And I really can't. I can't control it. At the end of the day, I've always done what I needed to do, which is try and write the best possible book I can write. And I've already done that. And there's nothing more to do on that front. So there's, my panicking is not changing the fate of anything because everything is already happening. So at this point, it's kind of just sit back and relax and see what happens. So mind you, that doesn't really stop it. That's not really how anxiety works. If it worked logically, that would be awesome, but it doesn't. But that's definitely been a difficulty for me this year. And then my last difficulty, which you could potentially guess, is workload. I had a much bigger workload this year. I took on a lot of projects, and so that meant I had a lot more to do. And so I think I didn't quite conceptualize what that would look like for my schedule and like how that would change how I work throughout the year. But it made a really big difference because I feel like last year my big thing was that I was like, oh, I don't want to work on 2 projects at once. And so I would like shift my schedule all the time so that I could just be working on 1 project at once. And like maybe there were like a couple weeks in the year where I had to work on 2 projects at once. And I was like, oh, this is so tiring. Oh, well, I only have to do it for a week or a couple weeks. And I think maybe there was 1 month where I worked on 2 projects at once. And I was like, oh gosh, this, today drained me. And then 2022 came and said, hold my beer, because it felt like the majority of the year working on 2 or more projects at once, because I was having to juggle all the different projects. And it wasn't as simple as just kind of writing it, because it was also managing deadlines. And sometimes I didn't know when a deadline would pop up and then suddenly it would be there. And so I couldn't necessarily plan in the same way that I might have planned for other projects and things like that. And it did affect certain things, like in my general day-to-day life, it made it more difficult for me to keep up with my kind of regular household tasks, not only because I was spending the time writing, but because when I was done working, I was really tired. And so the idea of like, now I'm going to go and like cook a full meal was like really not what I wanted to do. And I think it did throw off some of the balance in my life. And so it wasn't that this workload was like burning me out or anything. Like I was still able to do everything, but it felt like, it felt like when you blow a balloon, it felt like the highest bit of the balloon. Like, if I had done any more, the balloon would have burst, but I didn't. I kept it here, so it was like I was okay, but at any moment, anything more, and that balloon would have burst wide open. Whereas I feel like I was comfortable with like a half-filled balloon, where I had lots of space for lots of other things and to like grow and get bigger if I wanted to, but I didn't need to. I think that was really what I was more comfortable with. But I got really excited. I'm excited about all the projects I'm doing, and I was really excited about all of them. And so I was like, yeah, yes to that, yes to that, yes to that. And I feel like later on I was like, okay, let's prepare to say no to things, because this became a lot. Let's prep for more no and less yes. So yeah, I think that was just kind of the biggest difficulty of this year, was really balancing that workload. And I feel like in some cases it did, take away from what I was trying to do with my work. Not like my published things, but I had to create priority. And so I feel like that dark academia project I was working on, it ended up being so much bigger than I thought it would be. But I think if I had had a lesser workload, I could have shoved in more time to do what I wanted, but I didn't have the space for that. And so it kind of ended up being finished, and I was like, yeah, I have a lot more work to do with this. So I think the workload was definitely the biggest challenge / difficulty for me publishing wise this year. What have I learned this year from my traditional publishing experiences? I think the big thing I've learned is I need to kick FOMO to the curb. I think because when I got into the publishing industry, because I am still new to the publishing industry, my second book came out this year. And so I still feel like I'm new, even though I've had 2 books out now. I do still kind of I feel like I'm still pretty green in the publishing industry. And so a lot of these projects really came about last year and then were kind of agreed upon and have come into fruition this year. And so these, there are things that I was really excited about doing, like getting to do like IP projects and getting to be in anthologies, getting asked to be in anthologies. Like these were things that were very, very exciting to me and still are. And so I feel like I had this sort of thing of like, yes, yes, yes to all of those things. And I feel like it's like a fear of missing out thing. Like this project sounds so cool. Of course I want to be involved in it. And I think that's something that next year I really have to kick to the curb, because you can't be involved in every single exciting thing. And I think it's been great that people have wanted me to be involved in exciting things, but I can't. And that's something that I think I've learned this year that I really need to take into next year, and like saying no to things, so that I can make sure I have a workload that is more ideal for me. Because it's not that this workload was unmanageable. It was very much manageable for me, but I'm trying to live chill and free. And I know it might be hard to believe that because I am kind of an anxious person, but I'm not trying to live that way. I'm trying to live chilled out. Like I want work to be like a half of my life, and the other half of my life I just do whatever. I hang out, I do my home things, I do my little crafts and stuff like that. And so I'm not trying to max out my workload. And so that's something I really want to be thinking about going into next year, because I don't want to max out my workload again. I want to have something that's very manageable for me, however that looks and however that works out. So that's kind of something I've learned. I was like, you kick FOMO to the curb, and you have to say no sometimes. And I think what I've also learned has really been, and I feel like I learn this every year, you can't control everything, so calm the fuck down. I truly feel like I learn this every single year. I forget it, and then I have to relearn it by the end of the year, is to relax, because I can't control everything, and what will happen will happen. And so that's definitely something to relearn this year. Also something to relearn this year is that success looks different, and there are all different ways to achieve success and to be successful, and not all of those are going to come from flashy accolades. And I think this was forgotten during the year, again, in that panic of it not being enough to do well, and like having to do better than well. Better than just like, you can't just do well, have to do better, have to be exceptional. And so I think that made me forget that whole thing of the different ways that success looks. And I had to relearn that as well, and to focus on that as well. And I do think that's important too, because a book that can have a lot of expectation behind it can actually still be doing well to the publisher, even if a bunch of huge flashy things don't happen. And like, again, I already learned this lesson before, had to relearn it. And honestly, that's on transparency. Sometimes I learn things about traditional publishing and I'm like, okay, now we know this, let's go forward with this mindset. And then I panic, I get into a state, I completely forget all of that, I go back on everything, and then I have to relearn it again. And so that's the process. Learning is relearning sometimes. So that's definitely been part of the process for me. And so I'm hoping going into next year that I can remember these things throughout the year, ideally. So those are the big things I think that I learned from my traditional publishing experience this year. And finally, for this traditional publishing section, what am I looking forward to next year? So next year, there are some secret things that I'm looking forward to that have to do with travel. So I'm excited about those things. I'm also really excited about Delicious Monsters coming out and getting to celebrate that release, because despite all my anxiety and panic about it, I am really looking forward to having that book come out, and also getting to kind of chat with people about it and discuss it a little bit more. I actually do have a lot of fun discussing and chatting about my books, and so the nice thing about when your book comes out is that then you get to do that. And I haven't really gotten to yet. I've really been talking just about Blood Like Magic and Blood Like Fate because those are my releases I've had come out. And so I'm excited to do that and to get to celebrate its release with everyone and just like having it come out, partially also because it'll soothe my anxiety, because then I'll have known how it did and I can move on with my life from there. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also really looking forward to, publishing wise, getting to get into the horror community, because now I will have a horror / psychological thriller book. And so I really am excited about getting into that genre space because I really love those books. I've been reading a lot of them, you'll see in my reading update. And so it's really, I'm looking forward to being considered a horror author as well as a fantasy sci-fi author. That's just something that's really exciting to me because I'll get to, you know, talk about horror stuff with people, which I've really been looking forward to the entire time I've been working on this book and like reading more horror books, is like getting to be perceived as a horror author. That's something that's been really exciting for me. So I'm really looking forward to that in publishing. I'm also planning to join like the Horror Writers Association, and I'm hoping I can go to like one of those conventions and like get to meet other different horror writers and things of that nature. So I'm really excited and looking forward to that publishing wise. And yeah, I think that's also a lighter workload. I'm also looking forward to that because I know publishing wise it is going to be a lighter workload next year. Hopefully those are not famous last words, but as far as I can tell, it'll be a much lighter workload. And so I'm also really looking forward to that. So I think that'll be really nice. And yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. And that's the end of this traditional publishing section. Now I'm going to get into my writing process section of this video. I also have included some sections for things that were suggested by you when I put up my little YouTube post, specifically from Madeline and Amy. So I've included some of those things in this writing process section, which I eked out based on their questions. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about my writing process and some things about that in this section. So starting with things that are the same or different about my writing process this year. So something that is the same is that I am still a big planner. I still plan out all of my stuff. I still plan out how I'm going to work on every project, and I still do my little Google Calendar thing for scheduling. I still am a plotter. I still do that for sure. And so those are definitely the things that are the same. But I think what has been different in a big way this year is that I've discovered new tools that I've been using to help within my writing process. Mostly organizational tools, but also some kind of writing tools. And so a big thing has been Notion. So I'll link below. I have a few videos where I talk about using Notion for different things, but I've really like leaned into using Notion as my way to organize kind of all of my author things and also my like reading things and like writing things. Some of my writing things, not all of them, but some of my writing things, I've really leaned into using Notion for that. So I record my writing ideas on Notion. I also schedule out my writing schedule and all the different projects that I'm working on. I organize all of that using Notion. I also do some book calendar things for my work on Notion as well, just because I found it was a little bit easier and more separate than using Google Calendar, which is previously how I've like done calendars and stuff for my book to keep track of time. So that's been really helpful as well. So I really leaned into using it, and it was really helpful for me, especially given the fact that I was juggling so many projects this year. It just made it way easier to be able to track all of that, and I was able to kind of individually work on, you know, revisions and stuff and like track all of that within the like little project sections for each project. And so that was a big game changer for me this year. I relied very, very heavily on Notion and less on Google Calendar, though I do still use Google Calendar a lot for my scheduling. I just find it has a better visual interface. I really wish the Notion calendar was better. If the Notion calendar was better, I would totally use it, but I don't find it to be as helpful. And then also just scheduling wise, because events and stuff get scheduled into Google Calendar, it's just the better integration. It just makes it easier to keep all that stuff in Google Calendar and just kind of copy it onto Notion in case I need it. But I'm really mostly relying on Google Calendar for scheduling and things like that. And then I also discovered Plotter this year. So I have a link below to the video I did all about my Plotter overview. And so Plotter is a program, it's a software to help you kind of plot more intensely, but it also has world building features, like you can do characters and places, and like you can organize your entire series in there and things like that. And so I started using that very heavily this year, and it's made a huge difference to my writing because my plotting is so much more intense now than it was. And I feel like it didn't work out perfectly for every project. I think really my Dark Academia project had needed a lot more than I put into it. And so that was different. But for a lot of my projects, it was very helpful. I found that I had a much cleaner drafting process. And I also found that like things that were layered in my story, like character arcs that were layered in, or mysteries that were layered in, and red herrings and things like that, came out so much cleaner through that process. Like I feel like Bear Hunt came out as such a clean draft because I had all of those things in place. And so it was really, I was working on mostly character things, but all the mystery elements that I had put in had come out really well in it. So that made a really big difference. And that was really, really helpful to my writing process. And I think those are really the big things that were different, is that I was relying on different sort of organizational softwares to help me. And what was also different is that I changed my beta reading process. So the way I used to work on my books is I was send everything to betas always, because I always wanted that extra opinion. Whereas like, you know, workload wise, but also just, you know, usefulness wise, I realized that I really don't need to use beta readers for every single project, that I'd rather use beta readers for my full length original work. But for like the IP work, it wasn't really quite a fit, because I was like, this really isn't my beta readers that I'm using aren't really the audience for this. And then also just with like NDAs and things like that, like I didn't want to make things messy by sending it to people outside of that circle. And so there was that, but also with short stories, like I did use beta readers for one short story. And it just felt like, because it was so short, the feedback that I was getting, didn't feel large enough to necessitate having beta readers, especially when I'm going to send it off to the editor, and not only the editor of the anthology, but also the editor of the publisher are both going to give comments on it. It just felt like a lot of comments that I didn't necessarily need all of them for the short story. And so it felt better to just send it straight to the editors. So that was also something different in my process that I had to adjust for. But that was pretty much it for the sames and difference of my writing process. This last section of my writing process part of the video, I'm calling the idea factory, boom or bust. And so this was something Amy had asked about how many of my ideas kind of became how many of my ideas that I had this year kind of became something, and which ones didn't really end up becoming anything. And I did think that was interesting to talk about, because I think as an author, you'll have a lot of different ideas, and like, I do think it's interesting to look at like what becomes something and what doesn't. So in the case of this year, it was really a lot more because I was approached for things like anthologies, and the IP work. It was a lot more me being kind of presented with something like a theme or a vague idea, and then me having to come up with an idea that fit that. And so that was kind of a different process versus usually, because it's my original work, I just kind of I have a bunch of different ideas and I pick which ideas I'm most excited about using and doing, and then I kind of go forward with that. Whereas that wasn't so much the case this year because of the things I was approached about. And so it was mostly me kind of coming up with one idea and presenting it, or like coming up with one idea and going for it. So in that case, I was sitting down and I was thinking of the theme and I was thinking of an idea, with the exception of the He-Man stuff, in which case I thought of 3 separate pitches. So I thought of 3 separate ideas. And then there was one idea that was my favorite idea, and then I presented that one. And that ended up being the one that they liked. Or they were good with it, because I was like, this is the idea I like the most, and they were good with that. And so we ended up going forward with that. And so that ended up being kind of the case for the other things, is I already had kind of a theme and I just kind of thought of an idea. But I will say for one of the anthologies, which isn't announced yet, I ended up, if you remember, which you may not, I had been working on a little while back a Caribbean high fantasy story, and I originally had it as YA, and then it kind of seemed like it wasn't quite working, and so then I tried to make it middle grade, and then that also didn't work, and then then it was just like, it was too frustrating, and so I gave up on it and I set it aside, and I was like, I'm done. So what happened is, for one of these anthologies, I found that I was able to take a piece of the Caribbean high fantasy I had worked on, like a part of it and like a part of that concept, and I was able to make it into the short story. And so I taken that part of it and put it into the short story and expanded it into a different world and different characters, etc. But I was able to take something that I really already had in that idea. So that was cool to be able to repurpose that, knowing that like I had kind of fully given up on that project, that I was still able to use some of that. So that was cool. And then other idea wise, well, I mean, I think in the beginning of the year, I had more designs on looking a little bit more into that Blood Like Magic, Blood Like Fate spinoff. And then it just very quickly fell apart. I think between writing Bear Hunt and then working on the Dark Academia, what I had set up for that spinoff was also like a boarding school based thing, and I was just like, too much. It's too many boarding school things. It's too much of that. I still think the main character thing and like the conceit of it is good, but then at that point I had too many school stories and I was like, I don't know what to do with this anymore. And then I didn't even have time to work on it. So then it became a back burner thing anyway. But that was definitely like a hard nail in the coffin. I was like, I have too many school stories, and I don't need to have that many stories with like school settings. And so I just decided to like, yeah. So that ended up getting set aside. And that was like an idea that I had, and I was like really gung-ho to like maybe work on that proposal, and then that kind of fell right apart. So that's just floating on in the ether, and we'll see, maybe somewhere down the line I'll get an opportunity to work on it, or something about Blood Like Magic, Blood Like Fate will come up spin-off wise, and I'll be like, now the time is ripe. But yeah, I think that was something that I'd kind of been inkling about maybe working on throughout the year, that like quickly fell away, given my workload. And then I also played with some adult horror ideas because of everything that went on with the Newlyweds, which was an adult horror idea I originally had a different idea, and then it didn't work out, and then I wrote a new idea, and then it didn't work out, and then I didn't know what to do with it anymore. And so with that adult horror, I was debating whether I wanted to try and rewrite the Newlyweds into a new project, or like a completely like new thought of project, or whether I wanted to take one of the other adult horror ideas that I had and just write that instead. And so that was a bit of a battle, because I was like, part of me was like, no, I want to get this project right. I want to do it. I want to succeed. And then part of me was like, how many times are we going to try and rewrite this one project? Maybe we should just go to a completely different idea and then try again with that one later. So that was something I had toyed with, but then I ended up settling on rewriting the Newlyweds. Though I didn't work on that again this year because there wasn't time. There wasn't time for it. So I'm hoping to work on that next year, though I'll talk more about that in my projects video. So there was that. So I guess that was another kind of bust sort of idea thing. And then I think the final one was the horror trio. And so I had in kind of the back of my head been thinking about a trio of horror stories, and just kind of sitting on that, like slowly adding ideas to them. And that is something that I think well, I don't know why I said I think. That is something that is going to come to fruition, in that I'm going to be working on that next year. So I'll talk more about that in my writing projects video, but that is an idea that ended up going forward into something because I was like, yes, I'm prioritizing this. I'm making time for this. This is happening next year. Let's go. So that was that. But for the most part, this year was definitely a different sort of idea generation experience, in that I was really mostly just like getting themes or prompts and creating an idea for it versus me taking ideas that I had already had and trying to make something of them to like push forward or to sell because the sale had already been made. And so it was just me kind of picking an idea and like getting approval for it. So it was a very different process than like previous years. But because of that same workload, there were ideas that I had that I was thinking about working on that then had to be dropped or put on hold because of other reasons. So that's kind of that whole idea factory thing. Now we're going to talk about YouTube. So I wanted to put in this section because I really didn't talk about the changes to my channel that happened. And so I thought I would put this section in for anyone that is interested. So I'm just going to talk about the changes to my channel, and then I'm going to talk about the future of the channel. But yeah, I just thought I would chat about it because I previously hadn't. I just kind of put up a little post thing and I was like, hey, I have too much work. I can't be on here all the time. I'm going to do one video or 2 videos a month. Yeah, I do 2 videos a month. I'm going to do 2 videos a month and move on from there instead of a video a week or multiple videos a week. So, let me paint a picture. So in the beginning of the year, I had very many goals. I made a goals video and everything. I had very many goals, and I wanted to do journaling content, and I wanted to do book content, and I wanted to do all of that while posting every week. But doing the book content, the journaling content meant some weeks I would be posting twice a week. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm gung-ho. I'll make the book videos and the journaling videos short. And so then it'll be like totally cool. It won't be that much work. And then it was very quickly a lot of work because even though the videos were short, on my end, they took a ton of time. Because one, I'm not a booktuber, and so like the process of like gathering the books and setting up the books and like picking up the books and saying things coherently about the books, harder than it seems. And I was like, oh yeah, this is taking a lot of time. So there was that. And then there was also, I was finding that some months I like fully just like didn't have a good reading month, and I like didn't really like anything. So then it was like, what am I going to hop on here and talk about? Because of my position of an author and like the whole thing of like your peers, like I wasn't going to come on and be like, I hated these books or anything like that. So then I just kind of phased that out. And then the journaling became a lot. And then I also phased that out. And then I was sticking to my weekly content. And then I came up against something else, which is, I think if you're a creator on YouTube, you've probably maybe come up against this yourself, but I was feeling like my videos weren't doing as well. And I was also feeling like I wasn't really growing on YouTube, and I was putting out videos consistently, and it just kind of didn't seem to matter. So I was putting out all these videos and it felt like I was getting bad, like not a lot of views, or I'd put out something and I'd be really proud of it and it would like tank, like it would seem to tank to me because it would do worse than my other videos. I felt like I wasn't having a lot of growth, and it became very frustrating for me because I was like, I don't really know what else to do. Like, I'm confused at this point. And it's difficult and it's hard because I was like, I feel like I'm putting out quality content and it doesn't really seem to matter. And that became frustrating. And then I started to not have as many ideas for content, but I was like, well, I have to put out a video this week, so I have to make some sort of video. So I don't know, think of some sort of video and do something. And I would do that, and I'd like end up with a video that I was kind of like about it. And then I'd like spend that time and make myself do it, and it would tank anyway. And I'd be like, of course it tanked. Like, what was the idea? Was it any good? And then once my workload got heavier, it became really difficult. And so I started to lose my weekends because I'd spend the whole week working on writing stuff and I'd like film at some point during the week. And then I'd spend the whole weekend having to heavy edit videos so that I could get them up and like get them up quickly. And so then it was like my whole weekend was just me like editing videos and like uploading videos. And then during the week I'd film again. I'd like sneak in filming somewhere and then editing. And then it just was so much. And then I'd be so much more frustrated and upset when the video went up and it didn't do well, because I'd be like, my God, I like half killed myself to get this video out. And it didn't even matter. Like, I was getting so upset. And then I just had, I had to have a come to Jesus moment. And I was like, what are you doing here? Like, what are you trying to do? Why is it so important for you to grow your following? Like, what is the point of all of this? Like, what? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so I had to have that talk with myself, and I was just kind of like, yeah, I guess I don't know why it matters if I grow, because I don't think of YouTube as selling books I really don't think of any of my social media platforms as selling books for me. And it's nice to grow on a platform because it's like, yay, I'm doing the thing. But I was like, is it so important to do that thing that you're going to exhaust yourself doing the thing? Like, is it that important to you? And then I just kind of was like, no. And I just reconnected. Like, the whole reason I started a YouTube channel is I wanted to share my knowledge of traditional publishing. I wanted to share my journey and get to have that journey for me to look back at as well. And I wanted to make connections within the Authortube community and the writing community and like link up with other people. And that was what was important to me. That was why I started the channel, because I understood that having the YouTube channel was not going to sell books for me. I knew that was not a thing that was going to happen. But then somewhere along the way, I think I started attaching having more subscribers to something, to some amount of my self-worth. I started putting into it, and like feeling like, I don't know, like it was just like, it became something that was important to me when it hadn't been important to me in the beginning. And I think, everyone is going to get excited about numbers. Like, if I had a video that went viral, of course I would be excited. Of course that would be cool. But I just kind of reconnected to why I had made the channel in the first place. And it was to share those things. And so I was like, why does it matter then if 500 people watch it, or 800 people watch it, or 1,000 people watch it? I was like, you used to have 50 people watching your videos. Like, why does it matter how many people watch it then? And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. Because, a lot of you, people that like, write your comments and stuff, or people that like, I'm used to commenting regularly, I chat with you regularly. And like, that is what I wanted. And I know that you're enjoying the videos. And so I'm making the videos for the people that enjoy the videos. And So that's just kind of what I settled on. And so I was like, okay, so people are going to enjoy your video whether you post it every single week or whether you post it twice a month. Really the posting every single week was for the algorithm, so that the algorithm would pick me up and I'd get to more people and I'd get more subscribers, but I don't care anymore. So the purpose of that's not false. That's false to say I don't care anymore. If I hit 10,000 subscribers, of course I would be like, yeah, I hit 10,000 subscribers and I would be excited. But what I mean is that's no longer a focus for me. I'm just putting out videos that I enjoy making, that I hope people who watch and enjoy my videos already will enjoy. And that's it. And that's it. That's full stop. The purpose. And so that is why I ended up shifting down to 2 videos a month, because it worked better with my workload, which it does. It gave me significantly more freedom in that I could focus on videos that I was really excited about and that I thought were actually good video ideas instead of just throwing out things to fill up space. And if I didn't have enough good ideas for 2 videos in a month, I would just put out 1 video a month, and that would also be fine. So that's where I've landed on with that. So I'm like, I'm not playing the game. I'm not getting upset about views. I'm not comparing myself to other people and why do they have more views and I'm not doing it. I'm not doing any of it anymore. So that is essentially the whole saga of why I ended up doing these changes on my YouTube channel. So of course, on surface, it was really like workload. I needed to do less, but there was all this other stuff that came with it that I was like, that's kind of more a thing to discuss in a video, but I wasn't going to do a standalone video. So here it is in the wrap up. So that's that. And so the future of the channel, as I'm sure you've already noticed in my vlogs, I've been playing with different aesthetic styles. I've also been changing my thumbnails and things like that because now I have more time. And so I have more time to play with those things and like try out different aesthetics. So I've been doing those. I've also been playing with the idea of maybe getting a different camera. I don't know, because there isn't anything actually wrong with the camera I have. I was just like, I kind of want a better camera. I don't know. So we'll see. But I'm appreciating in the future of my channel having the flexibility to spend more time on videos. I'm enjoying doing the monthly vlogs. They pretty much end up being super long at this point, depending on what I have going on. But I do find that that works better for me as well. It puts less pressure on me too when I'm vlogging throughout the month, because I don't feel like I need to be vlogging something all of the time, because it's a monthly vlog, so I can kind of just work on the highlights, things like that. I'll be continuing to do the Save the Cat series, the deep dive series. I will be continuing to do that. It's just kind of spread out as I spread things out with videos, so it might take a little while for that series to finish, but I am still doing that because I know people are appreciating that a lot, and I'm like happy to make those videos and share that process. So I'm continuing to do those. And yeah, I'm just having a good time with my channel, and it's been great for me to be able to have the space of the creative space to kind of make what I like, and free myself from the concern of like how many views something gets, because I know that that's not actually my focus. Yeah, like I make some money from YouTube, which I greatly appreciate, but it is not my income. I am a YouTuber, but I am an author and YouTuber. I'm not a YouTuber. If that makes sense. Like my job is that I'm an author, and like I like doing YouTube, and it's something I'm continuing doing, and I plan to continue indefinitely. I think at most maybe I would, if I got very busy, I might drop down how often I put out videos, but I'd like to be able to continue to put out videos and continue to share things about traditional publishing and my process and things like that, and like be you know, a resource in that way. And I do also personally like getting to see my journey and being able to look back on things in videos. So planning to continue that. And that's kind of everything I have planned. I mean, I would really like to in the future have some budget to hire someone to do my subtitles, because that is the most like lengthy process of my YouTube uploading, is like doing the captions. So I'd like to maybe invest some cash in getting someone to do that for me. So I might be looking into that in the future, but I think that's really the only thing different. But yeah, that's the big YouTube update. And here we are at the final section where I'm going to talk about my reading updates, because I didn't do any of those book videos. And so I figured I'd do a general reading updates thing. I'm just going to talk about like what worked really well for my reading this year and like what didn't work so well for my reading this year. I'm going to show you some books that I really enjoyed. Not all of the books I really enjoyed. So there's a ton of books that I read and enjoyed this year. I'm just going to share some quick highlights. It's going to be really fast. I'm not even going to do synopses. I'm just going to be like, here are the books, and I'll link them down below so that you can look them up. And then I'm going to talk about the future of my reading and my reading plans for next year. And that'll be it. So we can go ahead and get started with that. So as a general overview, it's December 12th when I'm filming this. So it is not actually the end of the year, but it's December 12th. And as of now, I've read 131 books for the year. So my goal is to read 100 books this year. So I've surpassed it, which I'm very, very excited about. It's also buck wild. I don't know how I did that. I think it's probably because I write full time. Like I spend, you know, a bunch of my day writing, but then I also have a lot of time for reading. I also live in a place where like my family and friends do not live here. So I truly don't have a very extensive social life. So I also just generally spend a lot of time reading. But yeah, it was a bit wild to me, especially because I had a bigger workload. I really didn't expect to read so much this year. And it really doesn't even feel like it. Like I'll scroll through my list and I'm like, did I read all of, like I read that this year? So it's a little bit strange, but, I did in fact, read all those books. So that is my reading, and I still have more reading I'm planning. I'm hoping I just kind of want to finish off my TBR. Like I had a bunch of stuff I was looking forward to reading this year, and I kind of just want to finish it off. So I think I have like 6 books or something left on that list that I'd like to try and squeeze in this month, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what's actually possible. What worked and didn't work for my reading this year? So this year I really did want to read more graphic novels, which I did do. I still, for the most part, read mostly novels this year, but I eked in a lot of graphic novels, which I was very excited about. And I really, really enjoyed a lot of the ones that I read, which was also very cool. So that was great. I really had a fun time doing that this year. I really would like to do more of that next year, because it was really a good time. I really enjoyed getting into graphic novels, and I would like to work on a graphic novel one day in the future. And so that was really great for me. So I was really happy about that. I was surprised when I was like looking at like how much I had read in like different categories and genres and stuff. I did read actually more adult books this year than I did read young adult. They were very like close, like they were sort of like, I feel like it was like 60, I don't know, like 54. They were very close. It was a very close amount. I think I read like maybe 5 or 10 more adult books than I had read YA things. So yeah, that was interesting, but it was nice to get more of an even tilt. Like I think I'd like to keep that going through in the future. I'd kind of like to read just as many adult books as YA books, because I feel like in the past I've really, for the most part, just read YA books. And so it's nice to like have a little bit more of a balance now, especially considering that I'm wanting to write adult projects in the future. I'd like to get a little bit more of a lay of the land of like adult books and adult works and like getting into that quite a bit more. So I've been enjoying that, which was good. So that all really worked for me. And I thought that was really great. I read a ton of horror this year as well, which is also great. I think that was also the expanding into adult, is like, because YA horror I think is coming up a little bit more. So I was getting a lot of YA horror kind of new releases and like little backlist things. But then I was like, to search out more horror, I ended up getting into a bunch of backlist stuff, which was like a lot of adult works. And so I think that also made a big difference, but I really enjoyed that. So that all worked for me and my reading this year. What didn't work for my reading so much this year, I really need to curb my buying. I think I did do well this year in that I did do a lot of like library stuff and subscription stuff, but I found that a lot of the time what was happening is that I was physically buying a book and then I was borrowing the audiobook from the library, or I was listening to the audio on the subscription app. And so then I was like, so then why both? And in some cases I get it, because, you know, I'll really anticipate a physical book and I like the cover and I want it physically, but the act of reading it, I would prefer to do an audio. So I get it. But I think I did a lot of buying this year that was like, I was buying books that I was just kind of slightly interested in. And then I'd buy it and I'd read it and I didn't like it. And then I was like, great, now I just have it. And so I must have I feel like I donated like 20 books to the library this year, because it was just like books like that I like bought because I was mildly interested and then I didn't like it. So this year I'm very much like, only buy books that you are very, very, very excited about and very much anticipating. And if you don't like them, whatever, it happens. But I was like, no more of this buying books because you're like a little bit interested and it has a pretty cover. Enough of that. I need to stop doing that. And so that's what didn't work for my reading that I really need to get better at. And I also, what I'd like to do, well, I'll talk about this in my future plans actually. So I'll leave it at that, but definitely the book buying needs to calm down, especially because I don't have that much space in my office. Like I really don't have that much space to store that many books. So it needs to calm down. And now I'm going to talk about the books very, very quickly. Pretty much author and title and some quick stuff, but I wanted to talk about what I really loved in fantasy and what I really loved in horror, because I feel like those are like big things I've been reading, though I've mostly been reading horror this year than fantasy. But anyway, fantasy books that I loved. A Cruel and Fated Light by Ashley Shuttleworth. This is a sequel to A Dark and Hollow Star. I absolutely love this. All the court intrigue, all the drama. It was so good. It was so good. And I cannot wait for the other books. So that, I loved it. And I do know Ashley, who is the author, but I still loved it. So whatever. So I love that in fantasy. I also loved the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. I read this actually like quite recently and I absolutely loved it. It is so fun. It is such a fun book and I cannot wait for the sequel. I was a little bit hurt at the end of this one. But I'm getting over it. And I loved it so much. It was fantastic. And it's a beautiful, beautiful cover. So there was that one. And I'm pre-including it. I don't care. It's my channel. It's my life. I haven't read Bloodmarked yet because I was waiting until I had free time from like my writing and stuff. I was waiting until I had free time so I could devote my time exclusively to Bloodmarked. So I haven't finished reading it yet, but I've already started it and I expect to love it. So I'm putting it up here. I also reread Legendborn. Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. Sorry. This is why I had to stop the book videos because I suck at the booktuber thing. But I reread Legendborn. I honestly, I expected to reread it and be like, yeah, it was good. I did love it. But it was like the first time I loved it so much. I forgot about so many things that happened. And I was like, oh yeah, that happened and this happened. I'm very glad I reread it. I like still cried. And I was like, wow, just like talk to your emotions for Legendborn all over again. So I already know I'm going to love Bloodmarked, but if not, I reread Legendborn this year and I absolutely loved it all over again. I did put it on my little favorites list, even though I had read it before. So I'm just gonna include Bloodmarked in what I loved in fantasy. So there you go. And horror. So for me, horror this year was really like solidifying my like favorite horror authors, because you may not have known this, but like before I wrote my horror book, I had not read horror books. I had read like a series when I was a kid that I think was actually horror, but I just didn't naturally think of it that way. But I didn't really read horror books. I watched horror movies and TV shows, and that was my thing. But then when I was writing a horror book, I was like, okay, I'm gonna read horror books, and I've like very much fallen in love with them, and I read a ton now. And so I've been reading a bunch of different authors and like discovering favorites. And so I feel like this was really the year of like solidifying favorites. So like I had loved something from an author last year, and this year I read more from the author, and I was like, yes, I favorite horror author. So first up for that is Alexis Henderson. So I read and loved The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, which is a fantasy, but I like consider it to be like a fantasy horror. And then her second book, House of Hunger, came out this year as well. All of the fantastic gothic vibes, like just all of that there. And so this very much solidified for me, like I'm gonna read whatever horror Alexis Henderson puts out. I just am. And I actually I don't even like vampires. And I know that's like a thing because a lot of people love vampires now, and vampires are back and vampires are so hot. I actually don't really like vampire stories anymore. I used to really love them. I don't really care for them anymore. But this, I was like, I'm gonna read it. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I had a fun time. It had all the gothic vibes I wanted. And I really enjoyed the twist on the vampires. And so I'm just like, I'm clearly just going to read any horror that Alexis Henderson writes. So that was that. And then this was the year of Kate Alice Marshall. So These Fleeting Shadows, which was their book that came out this year. I read and loved this one. I Am Still Alive, which is more of like a survivalist book. Also loved. Rules for Vanishing, the book that started it all, by Kate Alice Marshall. Absolutely loved. I really, really want to reread it, and I really should make a point to reread it next year. And then also Our Last Echoes by Kate Alice Marshall. So there it is. I really, I've gone through the whole backlist, I believe, of YA books. And Kate Alice Marshall's first adult is coming out next year, which I'm already very, very anticipating. And then also another YA from her is coming out next year, which I'm also very anticipating. And so I think from how many books is it? The 4 Kate Alice Marshall books and the 2 I'm heavily anticipating very much solidified Kate Alice Marshall as a favorite horror author. So there is that. And then Amy Lukovics, who here's Daughters Unto Devils by Amy Lukovics. And I ended up going through the backlist this year and also solidified Nightingale, completely unhinged. I think about Nightingale all the time by Amy Lukovics. I think about it all the time. I'll just be sitting and I'll be thinking like, oh my gosh, like she really did that. That was so buck wild. Like just completely off the wall horror. Like if you read horror and you are annoyed about reading things that feel predictable, I highly recommend Amy Lukovics because you're not going to get this. It's going to be different. It's going to be different than what you think. And so 100% very much solidified Amy Lukovics as a favorite horror author. And then finally, I'm sure to no one's surprise, Clown in a Cornfield. What? Oops, sorry. So my book plate fell out of it. Clown in a Cornfield and Clown in a Cornfield 2 by Adam Caesar solidified Adam Caesar as a favorite horror author. I really want to get into his adult works because I know he has adult works that are already out, but just a top tier horror series, Clown in a Cornfield 1 and Clown in a Cornfield 2, Frenda Lives. And there's going to be a third book I've been following very closely on Twitter. And Adam said he's working on the third book, so I'm very excited. And it's also, if you haven't seen, been optioned for film by the same people that created Smile, which I watched, which is a movie, a horror movie, and I watched it like a couple weeks ago. It's very, very good. It took me back to like, it's like, it has the feel of like classic 2000s horror. Like that's the feel of it. And so I'm very excited to see what they do with Clonda Cornfield. And so yeah, super exciting stuff. Solidified Adam as a favorite horror author. And then one more horror book that I just have to mention because I absolutely loved it. It's really more, I guess you could think of it more as like a gothic, but it's Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. I was like, I think there's an initial there. Plain Bad Heroines. I actually bought the paperback, which is like red. And then I loved it so much that I went and I bought the hardcover, partially because the paperback is so thick, it like cracked the spine. Anyway, I won't belabor the point, but this book is absolutely amazing. I love that we get, it's very meta in some ways. There's a lot of different POVs. You should look up the synopsis. I'm not doing a good job, but I absolutely loved it. It is such a good gothic. And even though it's like very long, it's so engrossing and I was so engaged and I was so into reading it the entire time. I absolutely love this. I do actually think I would probably reread this one day because I'm so in love with it. So I wanted to make sure to mention that. And finally, this doesn't fit into fantasy or horror, but I wanted to do an honorable mention of Hurricane Summer by Asha Bromfield. I don't read a lot of contemporary, and when I do read a contemporary, I love a hard-hitting contemporary. That's like the contemporaries I'm interested in. But I read this one, which is of a young girl who is from Canada who goes to Jamaica to visit her father, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I sobbed reading it, and I felt like I related so much to the experience. And you know, my family is from Trinidad and Tobago, not Jamaica, but I felt like there were so many parallels that I really related to, especially, you know, being kind of raised in Canada, and for me, born and raised. I can't remember if Asha is also born in Canada, but, you know, being from Canada and then, you know, interacting with your Caribbean culture and like trying to find ways to fit and things like that. Like there were a lot of things that I felt really resonated with my own experience. And then there were so many just like separate discussions about, you know, womanhood and your femininity and your sexuality as a young woman and like coming into that. And there were so many just discussions that really just resonated a lot with me. And this was just like such a memorable book that like really got to me. And so this is the stuff, man. Every once in a while, like I don't read a lot of contemporary, but every once in a while I will read a contemporary that it just like blows my mind. Like it just completely like, I feel like change. Like I feel like that very much about Akemi Dawn Bowman's contemporary works, Summerbird Blue, and why am I forgetting Summerbird Blue? Ugh, I'm blanking on the first book, but both of those I absolutely loved. And so I just wanted to mention it because it was so good, and I highly recommend it, though I would say check for trigger warnings on this one. I would say check for trigger warnings on really every book, especially with the horror stuff, because it's just, yeah, there's a lot in there. But yeah, those were some of the reads I really enjoyed. I have so many more that I did. I have a bunch on my favorites list that I didn't even talk about here, but I just wanted to kind of highlight those as a kind of like what I enjoyed in fantasy and horror and one honorable mention. And now to discuss my future reading plans. So for my future reading plans, for one, buy less physical books. That is a big one up there. Do that less. Only buy ones you're really, really excited for, and other ones you can get from like the library or from a subscription service that you're already paying for audiobooks, which is I have like Libra FM and I also use Scribd. So I was like, you're already paying for those. Why don't you use those? And they also take up less physical space. And I really love reading audiobooks anyway. So it's just kind of like, calm it down. You can buy it in that way. So that's definitely a future reading plan. But also I have some series that I would like to read or reread. So this year I read the entirety of A Series of Unfortunate Events, which I had never finished as a child. And so it was really exciting to get to finish that. And then I also am still doing, because I haven't quite finished yet, but I'm rereading through the entire saga of Darren Shan. And so what I also did is I bought the entire Demonidas series, also written by Darren Shan. I only read up to book 3 or 4, I think, when I was a teenager. And so I'm wanting to finish out the series. So it's 10 books. So I want to do that. I also want to reread the entire Unwind Dystology, because I got those special editions of the books, the Unwind Dystology by Neil Schusterman. So I want to reread the entirety of that. And then I've also set out some series that I just want to read. So like I want to read the Southern Reach series. I want to read the Greenbone Saga. Like I'm just trying to like go backlist into these series that I want to read. And I really want to focus on backlist in general. I just want to read way more backlist books. I just feel like I have been like overly focused on new releases, and I feel like every year I'm like, read more backlist books. But I really do want to do that, and I want to read more of the backlist from authors who I've already enjoyed, because I feel like there are authors whose books I liked and then I just like haven't read more from them, and it's weird. So I'd really like to go into the backlist and read more from those authors I've already enjoyed. And so that's kind of, I think, going to be my focus for next year. I would really like it if I read just as many new releases as I read backlist, or really more backlist than I read new releases. I'd like to get a little bit more into that and stop being so new release focused. And I also think that'll help with me finding more books that I'm really enjoying, because even though I've read 131 books so far this year, I think I have maybe like 15, 20 books in my like favorites of the year list, even though there were a lot of books I enjoyed. And maybe I should make a list that's just like, I enjoyed these books, even if they weren't my favorites of the year, so that I can kind of track that a little bit better. But yeah, I'd like to do that as well, and kind of just like have more of my reading experience be more books that I'm really enjoying and liking, than feeling like I'm having a lot of meh reading experiences, which I feel like towards the latter half, I feel like I was on such a high in the beginning of the year, and then like in the latter half of the year, it was just like I kept reading things that I was so meh about or actively disliked. So want to try and improve that in the future. I'm also thinking about maybe doing a journaling for each book, just like a page to write something, because I do keep track of books in my Notion and things, but I just kind of make bullet points about what I liked or didn't like. And I have this journal that I bought when I thought I was going to be gung-ho on journaling, and now it's just sitting around, and I'm probably not going to do videos or anything, but like just for me, I thought it might be fun to just like do a page of just like writing out something about each book I read. So I may or may not do that next year. We'll see how gung-ho I feel later on, but that is my plan for now. And so that's it for this end of the year video. I hope that you enjoyed it and hanging out with me for this wrap up. This is my last video of 2022. So the next time you see me, we will be in 2023. We'll be in a new year. But if you notice that I'm wearing the same outfit or look very similar, it's because I filmed these on the same day. But it'll still be the future for you. So that's what matters. And so yeah, I will see you in 2023. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.